I have some opinions on Havoc mode, primarily in the ways that it falls flat, but also how it can improve. I will fully admit, though, that Havoc is overall better than what I was anticipating. It's no secret that Havoc is just Weaves but in Darktide, so I didn't exactly have the highest hopes for the game mode. Despite all of its flaws, though, it's not as bad as being forced to actively exploit and cheese the game to get through a map in less than 20 minutes because of invisible gunners one-shotting you while you deal 80% less damage to them. Yes, I have PTSD, how can you tell? But being better than Weaves is admittedly a low bar to pass, and even though I did genuinely have fun with Havoc mode, it still has its share of issues. The first of these were the server issues. It's never a fun time to be force disconnected from a game, but it's especially disheartening to be force booted from a game in what is essentially supposed to be a ranked mode. Most disconnects tend to happen right at the start of the map when the team can just wait around for the person to reconnect, but the few times it happened mid-game was absolutely brutal. It's also just not fair that people are sometimes outright blocked from rejoining if they get disconnected and need a timeout because the game thinks that they just quit. Thankfully, you can bypass this by just joining through Steam, but if that loophole ever goes away, disconnects will go from nerve-wracking and annoying to straight-up run-ending. So first and foremost, the server issues need to be ironed out. Second, the entire demotion system. I have a lot to say about this, both the weekly rank updates and the 3 losses equals demote, but first let's talk about the latter. I understand what Fatshark is trying to accomplish by causing you to demote if you fail 3 times. By adding a punishment for failure, it inherently raises the stakes of the game mode and forces you to take it more seriously, which indirectly encourages teamwork and communication rather than playing as individuals. This is also supported by the removal of quick play and the requirement of going through the party finder. By forcing people to join groups and lobbies, it allows you the opportunity to talk strategy and builds with the group before going in. In practice, though, this doesn't work for 4 main reasons. First, disconnects and server issues cause unfair and unnecessary losses. While my group and I never ended up losing a run because of server issues, we had 1 or 2 very close calls, and it always leaves a sour taste in your mouth regardless of if that disconnect actually mattered or not. This issue also gets worse as you go up in rank, because games start taking longer and longer, and the only thing worse than losing a try to server issues is losing that try after playing for 40 minutes. Second, the threat of a punishment for failure promotes toxicity, and the lack of any vetting features continues to perpetuate it. Anytime a video game has an explicit punishment for failure, there is going to be an increased amount of toxicity to deal with if you end up attempting to cooperate with random people you do not know. It is the internet after all, and there is no way to stop that, but Fatshark can implement features to limit toxicity and negate it as much as possible. For instance, with no gear requirement, people are able to join Havoc games with underleveled gear, and with no way to vet gear without inviting people into your strike team, people are forced to open up a direct channel of communication between each other, which allows for instant and easy toxicity to flow. Allowing people to view gear in the party finder would let people reject others without ever opening up a channel of communication, which would inherently limit toxic interactions. It would not stop people from gatekeeping Havoc, expecting you to play certain builds, which is unfortunately something you'll never be able to stop from happening completely, but the toxicity that stems from that gatekeeping can at least be somewhat negated. And third, the way in which ranks update causes a disconnect between hosts and clients. Since only the host has their Havoc rank updated at the end of the match, the host is incentivized to try so they won't get punished for losing, but since clients only have their rank updated at the end of the week, it doesn't matter how many times they lose before the end of the week. This point doesn't matter for pre-made groups, since everyone is going to be tied to one specific host's progression more often than not, but for those going through the party finder, clients are not pressed to try as hard due to the lack of punishment, which causes people to not take the mode seriously and promotes even more toxicity. And this isn't even to mention how exactly ranks update, which isn't good either. If you're choosing to manually climb the ranks one at a time, your rank is set to the last rank that you completed, not the next rank that you have yet to complete. If you last completed Havoc rank 29 and was given the mission to go to rank 30 but stopped playing for the week, your Havoc rank would be set to 29 and you would be required to once again beat Havoc 29 before you could attempt 30. This essentially means that you are required to replay one mission you've already completed per week, which increases to 2 if you miss on playing for that week. Also, real quick tangent on the penances. I like the penances for Havoc and the cosmetics that you get through them, but it doesn't feel great that I completed Havoc mode just to have 0 progression on unlocking the head cosmetic and title for Havoc on hand, with the expectation that I need to now play an additional 50 games for the helmet and 100 for the title. Now let's talk about the actual game mode itself. The primary issue with the gameplay of Havoc is that it's one-dimensional and leaves little room for variety. This is due to a mixture of the removal of the toughness grace period and increased rate of fire from ranged enemies, both of which come from Emperor's Fading Light. The toughness grace period is a specific amount of time that occurs after your toughness is broken that both reduces the incoming damage of enemy attacks and increases the spread of enemy ranged attacks. This is the mechanic that prevents you from getting shredded by gunners in normal missions, and with it gone in Havoc mode, it warps the game in such a way that it forces you into an overly safe meta that consists of dome shields, vet shouts, and zealot prayers. It's true that higher skilled players don't need these abilities to complete Havoc mode, but the fact of the matter is that they give you such an astronomical level of value over everything else in the game that for the average player, there is really no other option. Despite all of my complaining, Havoc is still a fun game mode at its core. I actually did have fun more often than not while playing, and when I wasn't having fun, it was because of 1 or 2 specific things that I do believe can be easily fixed. Havoc mode can certainly be frustrating at times, but it is genuinely fun because it actually requires your entire group to communicate and play as a team to a level that normal orc missions do not. That being said, the main problems that Havoc have right now is the rigid meta and the problems surrounding the meta mechanics outside of gameplay. Here's what I would suggest to fix them. First, disable the 3 losses equals demotion mechanic until the server issues are fully ironed out. Once they're fixed, that mechanic can come back into play, but until then, we should not be punished for it. Second, remove the penalty for not playing. There is no reason why we should be punished for missing a week, so honestly, just get rid of it. Third, make the rank of clients update at the same time as the hosts right after mission end. This would kill 2 birds with 1 stone by incentivizing people to actually try as client, while simultaneously make it much easier for people to host their own games after playing as a client, which would also entice people to play the mode more rather than waiting around for a week for the rank to update. Fourth, allow people to see the weapons and major abilities players are using while in the party finder, similar to how we can see people's build in the mission ready up screen. In a game mode like Havoc, people will always be toxic and gatekeep the mode when it comes to build and weapon choices. There is no avoiding that. There are ways to negate and minimize that toxicity though, and giving people the means to see builds and reject people without ever having to open up a direct line of communication to them would significantly cut down on toxic interactions. Fifth, change the Havoc on-hand penance to instead be complete Havoc assignments or assist players in completing their Havoc assignments. Assisting other players grants 2 times progress. Sixth, specifically make it so that the increase in shooter speed only applies to elite gunners and not to normal horde level shooters. The primary reason why the meta is so rigid in Havoc is because a single non-elite shooter can zero you almost instantly if you make a single mistake. Removing the attack speed from non-elite shooters would lessen the impact that solo and tiny groups of normal shooters would have, while retaining the impact that elites and massive groups of normal shooters would have. This would also somewhat loosen the rigidity of the meta, but not entirely abolish it either. You'd still be taking all of the penalties the mode offers, while normal shooters would still fire more shots in each barrage and have a shorter cooldown between barrages. Dome and Golden Toughness would still reign supreme, but there would be a bit more wiggle room in what people could run. This alone would not be enough to fully abolish the rigidity of the meta though, which is why one more change is needed, and that change is, well, kind of dependent on Fat Shark. The entire meta that exists now is because of how cracked gunners and shooters are. If you think about it, a single lone scab stalker is more dangerous than a chaos spawn, which is crazy, and that is all because of Emperor's Fading Light. In order for the meta to truly shift away from what we have now, the modifiers have to shift away from the cracked shooter meta and introduce a new main threat for us to face. The thing is, though, we're not entirely sure how Fat Shark is going to approach handling Havoc mode in the future. The way I see it, they can take one of two paths. First, they could go down the path of releasing seasons for Havoc mode, with each season having a primary modifier and meta that defines it. Right now, we have the cracked shooter meta that is determined by Emperor's Fading Light, but next season we have a different meta that would happen if they changed out Fading Light for something else. Cracked Elite meta, Cracked Monster meta, the Speedrun meta, or whatever it is they come up with. This would also presumably introduce new penances and rewards that get added for each new meta, which would require us to play through Havoc mode every time a new season releases to get the new rewards, similar to how Seasons and Weaves worked. The other option is they could continue to add new maps, modifiers, and conditions to Havoc over time. There wouldn't be any seasons associated with this, but rather a slow drip feed of content into the pool that would expand Havoc over time and allow for an eventually truly random experience, where each mission could hold a different set of modifiers that require an entirely different meta. The season system was fine for Weaves, but I don't think it would be good for Havoc. The current meta we have now is boring, but ultimately not that bad and can be dealt with reliably. The main concern is if they end up creating a meta for Havoc that is genuinely miserable to play through, because we would be stuck playing through that meta and those modifiers for the entire season with no break. This would cause people to just up and quit the mode for entire seasons where there is a meta or modifier in play they don't like, which would cause Havoc mode to adopt an overall smaller player base than it has right now. I'd argue that no seasons would be the best for Havoc, with modifiers being truly random between missions. This would solve the issue of the rigid meta, as you would be required to really consider and change your build on a mission-by-mission basis, and would prevent people from outright quitting the mode if they got a modifier they didn't like. They'd only have to play it once to get past it, or they could just hop around hosts or wait a week to reroll the mission and get something they actually want to play. Imagine rolling up an Emperor's Fading Light mission and having to run the current meta, then afterwards rolling a modifier similar to the melee-only modifier in Maelstrom. A cracked elite meta would look different than our cracked shooter meta, and things that would never be considered for Havoc now would actually be considered, such as Pickaxe Ogrins or Mark 15 Eviscerator Zealots. And then imagine after completing the cracked elite mission, you roll a cracked monster mission, and then have to shift your team comp again to account for that new modifier. At the end of the day though, Havoc is specifically for the more advanced players of Darktide, and I think that's perfectly okay. The main change Havoc needs is more variety, and as long as that variety is introduced without compromising the added challenges that Havoc offers, it'll be okay. What do you think about Havoc mode though? What changes would you make? Let me know down in the comments below.